Welcome to Sufi Voices. I'm Wafa, and as Rumi says, out beyond all notions of wrongdoing and right doing, there's a field and I'll meet you there. I look forward to connecting with you every week to expand our hearts and learn about the universal language of love. Welcome to a new edition of Sufi Voices, which is starting on a new day, on a Sunday. I'm very, very excited by the new change of schedule. On Sunday, I hope you will enjoy this program, which will be dedicated to flowers. Now, why flowers, you may ask? Spring has already started in your countries, but not in the country where I'm residing now. Spring has only started about a week ago in Canada. Believe me, folks, the lake on which we were staying has only defrosted about 2 weeks ago, and suddenly, bit by bit, every day, whenever I go to my 1 hourly walk in the forests around the lake, I notice one new wild flower. Flowers which don't really exist in the UK where I normally live. So it's been a fascinating journey for me to discover Canadian wildflowers, and flowers have been on my mind, on my camera, and I have spent quite a few hours researching the meaning of flowers for Sufis in general and for Rumi and Hafiz in particular. So we are going to be really listening to many wonderful gems, such as Rumi saying, "I smile like a flower, not only with my lips, but with my whole being." Or him also saying, "The only lasting beauty is the beauty of the hearts." So come with me on this wonderful journey with spring flowers and flowers in Islam. I hope you'll enjoy this program as much as I'm enjoying presenting it to you. The most important flower in Islam is probably the rose. For Rumi said, "This love is the rose that blooms forever." And he also says, "Misery and joy have the same shape in this world. You may call the rose an open heart or a broken heart." But why is it so important? Because it symbolizes the Prophet Muhammad himself, peace be upon him, and divine beauty. The rose is known in Islam as the flower of heaven. Each year, during the Muslim pilgrimage to Mecca, known as the Hajj, the black cloth of the Kaaba is sprinkled with rose water from Iran or Turkey or Damascus, and rose oil is burned in Kaaba oil lamps, releasing the beautiful fragrance of the flower for all to enjoy. It is also written that when Sultan Mehmed II conquered Istanbul in 1453, then it was known as Constantinople, he had Hagia Sophia, Saint Sophia, the most beautiful church in Constantinople, washed thoroughly with rose water before converting it into a mosque. This beautiful flower had a strong influence on many of history's most famous poets, including, of course, Rumi and Hafiz, we will see, and in Sufism. Why? Because attached to a long thorny stem, the rose symbolizes the mystic path to Allah. That's why Rumi writes, "What is the scent of the rose? The breath of reason and intelligence, a sweet guide on the way to the eternal kingdom." are not only revered for their beauty but also for their unique fragrances. The great physician Ibn Sina, known as Avicenna in the West, was the first great thinker to emphasize the benefits of flower fragrances. He states in his great medical text, the Canon of Medicine, dating from the 11th century, that the rose is beneficial for fainting and rapid heartbeats. It strengthens the brain by enhancing one's memory. Ibn Sina also stated that boiling rose water and exposing the head to its steam has healing effects and especially beneficial for eye diseases. Roses in those days was commonly used to treat stomach pain, ulcers, liver and mouth diseases, and also sore throats. Now, all women, including me, use rose water and rose oil. We use it for our face, and Ottoman women used rose water and rose oil for the hammam, for their baths. They loved to bathe with it, to use it on their body, to cleanse it, and because it has a refreshing fragrance. Now, the rose doesn't only smell beautiful, it tastes delightful. Have you ever tried rose petal jam? If not, you must try it. It's an absolute delicacy, and my childhood is filled with the taste of rose petal jam. Now, rose products can also be made into halwa, can be made into Turkish delights, and can be used for flavoring desserts such as ice cream, rice pudding, yogurt, and sherbets. The Ottoman loved roses so much that the Sultan had a special rose garden at the back of Topkapi Palace, and they were located near the shores of the sea. This famous park is known as Gulhan, which means rose house in Turkish. The park is still one of Istanbul's most famous places to take a walk and smell the roses. Rumi advises us to spend more time with roses and jasmines. He also tells us, "Come out here where the roses have opened. Let the soul and world meet." He also writes, "What was whispered to the rose to break it open last night was whispered to my heart." The garden of the world has no limits except in your mind. That's why I will soothe you and heal you. I will bring you roses. I too have been covered with thorns, write Rumi. And he says, "Darkness may hide the trees and the flowers from the eyes, but it cannot hide love from the soul." And to wander in the field of flowers, pull the thorns from your heart. Do not sit with sadness, my friends. When you enter a garden, do you look at thorns or at flowers? Spend more time with roses and jasmines. Second to the rose is, of course, the tulip, which is native to Central Asia, which is now Turkey, and it appeared as early as the 11th century, and it is in the poetry of Rumi, of Umar al-Khayyam, and of Hafiz. Now, more importantly, it started being used as a decorative element in palaces and on plates. So most people believe that the tulip is Dutch, but in fact it's a botanist called Carolus Clusius who brought the tulip to Europe in the second half of the 16th century. So a few hundred years after the Middle Easterns were using it, adorning their houses with it, and writing about it. Now, the tulip is now deeply woven in the fabric of Dutch national identity because it symbolized wealth, nobility, and beauty, and influenced garden design and fine art. And it led to the very famous tulipomania in 1633-37, which was the Dutch Golden Age. Now, did you know that in those days a single bulb would cost $40,000 to $80,000, and you could exchange one bulb to buy an elegant home in the best district of Amsterdam? So this tulip fever, which arose in Europe, is originating from the Middle East. And we are going to share a lot of lovely information about tulips. Tulips in Islam signifies feminine beauty, perfection, and paradise. And the Ottoman dynasty eventually used it as the symbol of their dynasty. For instance, Sultan Murad's son's battle shirt is covered with tulips, with Quranic verses on its front and the tulips on its back. To better understand the tulip, we should look at Sinan, this most wonderful architect who made Istanbul what it is now today, and visit the Rustam Pasha Mosque in Istanbul and look at the beautiful tulips adorning it. Now, the most important thing about tulip I discovered during my research for this program was in Turkish, a tulip is called lale, and in Islamic numerology, the same number for lale is the same value as Allah. Lale, Allah. You can understand this. So that's why the tulip constitutes an object of spiritual meditation. Mystics like to say that the flower is humble because when it blooms, it bows its head before the majesty of God. A little bit more about tulips and the Ottomans' love for it is that Sultan Selim II, who is the father of Suleiman the Magnificent, my favorite Ottoman sultan, so he was between 1566 and 74. Sultan Selim didn't reign that long, so his son Suleiman took the throne aged 27. Sultan Selim, however, ordered 50,000 bulbs of wild tulips for his palace gardens, and they started cultivating it with thousands of varieties, and then they started giving it names in Persian, because in those days poetry was mainly written in Persian. And so they called it, for instance, in the 17th century, Light of Paradise, Matchless Pearl, Cloth of Love, Rose of the Dawn, and Fountain of Life. Now, favorite tulips in Ottoman culture differs from European taste. The tulips that were considered the most beautiful in Ottoman times were those that were long and thin and carried a dagger-shaped sharp petal, a type often encountered in Ottoman decorative and books and art. Also, in Ottoman time, tulips reached exorbitant prices. For instance, one called the pomegranate lance sold for $600 in the early 18th century, but it didn't reach the craziness of the Dutch tulipomania. The flower also lent its name to a historic period called the Tulip era, which was between 1718 and 1730, which was a time of great artistic flourishing, and it owes its name to the Ottoman trend and obsession for tulips in courtly circles. The Ottoman taste of tulips waned during the second half of the 18th century, but never disappeared. And apparently, at the moment, Istanbul has a contemporary tulip festival. I'd like to check it out one day. It's going on my bucket list. Lo and behold, in my research, I found 3 lines translated by Gertrude Bell, this amazing Orientalist woman who drew the frontiers of the Middle East at the beginning of the 20th century. She translates 3 lines from the poet Hafiz, which says, "The tulip. Perhaps the tulip know the fickleness of fortune's smile, for on her stalk's green shaft she bears a wine cup through the wilderness." Bell translated another poem of Hafiz on the tulip. It says, "Cypress and tulip and sweet eglantine, of these the tale from lip to lip is sent, washed by 3 cups, O Saqi, of thy wine. My song shall turn upon this argument. Spring, bride of all the meadows, rise up, clothed in her ripest beauty. Fill the cup of spring's handmaidens, runs this song of mine." And the last paragraph of this very long poem also says, "From the Shah's garden blows the wind of spring. The tulip in her lifted chalice bears a dewy wine of heaven's minimus string. Until Ghiyasuddin the Sultan hears, sing, Hafiz, of thy longing for his face. The breeze is whispering round thy dwelling place, shall carry thy lament unto the king." And by the way, a saqi means the cupbearer, the person who pours the wine in you, but also it is God, because he pours eternal light and eternal life into us. The spring for Hafiz wasn't only a joyful season. He actually writes about sad spring. He says, "Spring has appeared. Hyacinth and tulips and daffodils rise laughing from all their beds. But where are you? Where are you? The earth holds you fast in her darkness. I shall weep like the spring's clouds. Perhaps then you shall rise from your depths as spring's most beautiful flower." He obviously was mourning the loss of his wife and his son who died before he did. He also writes a poem called Wishes. "I wish I were a morning clear lake and you the sun reflecting in it. I wish I were a spring in the meadows, and you the flower, laughing at yourself in it. I wish I were a green thorn on a bush, and you the rose, shimmering red around it. I wish I were a small grain of sand, and you the bird, picking it swiftly up." Hafiz also wrote a short poem called The Burning Tulips. He says, "Someday, countless red tulip flames shall sprout from my grave. Do not be amazed at this wonder, rather, splendid one, consider the mighty glow, a glow of love devoted to you, which once burned so much in life that in death it still glows."
Nightshade blooming in my garden, love I found on my way, taking root when all was darkened, scarred in me always. Taking root when all was darkened, scarred in me always. Shine, shine, shine on my dark nights, shine a light on me. I've been wandering all my life, now I see the light. I've been wandering all my life, now I see the light. In my mornings, waves have taken what I thought was there. I left you in time forsaken, flowers in your hair. Shine, shine, shine on my dark nights, shine a light on me. I've been wandering all my life, now I see the light. I've been wandering all my life, now I see the light.
That was my favorite singer of the day, Sami Yusuf, singing an Azerbaijani folk song called, very appropriately for our program, The Garden. But it is time to go to our beloved Nizami, who wrote The Seven Beauties, The Seven Wise Princesses, as I wrote them 20 years ago. And in The Seven Wise Princesses, there is a huge place for gardens. Gardens play a big role in that book. And the tale we are going to tell today is about the emir who did not want to marry. It was told on Sunday by the Greek princess. I write, one Sunday morning, Shah Bahram woke up smiling. The sun was shining, the birds were singing, and he was eager to visit the beautiful Humay, the Greek princess who lived in the yellow pavilion of the sun. Bahram put on a robe of yellow silk, a gold crown, and an amber ring. He fastened his golden dagger onto his gold belt, and off he went, whistling a happy tune. Princess Humay was as fair as the sun. Her hair was golden, and her eyes were like honey. She wore a yellow dress woven with gold threads, and a crown made of yellow roses. Sweet amber musk was her perfume. Smiling, she invited the Shah to take a seat on a gold couch covered with gold cushions. "Welcome to the pavilion of the sun," said Princess Humay, bringing Shah Bahram white wine in a golden cup. "Thank you, my lady," said the Shah, sipping his wine and tasting a piece of saffron cake that she offered him. "This cake is as sweet as honey, and this wine as fragrant as musk," he added, brushing the crumbs off his hand. Feeling satisfied and refreshed, the Shah asked, "What story will you tell me today? Why, for instance, did you decide to live in the yellow pavilion? And why do you love the colour yellow? Do tell me." So the princess began her story. Once upon a time in the city of Baghdad, there lived a rich emir. So rich he could not count his money. He was handsome too, as handsome as a spring morning, and he had everything his heart desired. Sumptuous palaces, thoroughbred horses, rich carpets, finely wrought swords. He had all except one thing. He had no wife, nor did he want one. "This is strange," interrupted Bahram. "Such a rich and handsome man and no wife, no children to give his money to." "Well, he was simply terrified of getting married," answered Princess Humay, "and all because of what the best astrologers in the kingdom had foretold when he was young." The moment the astrologers had finished drawing his horoscope, they all agreed on one point, that the emir should never marry, because if he did, he would spend his life fighting with his wife. Upon hearing the grim news, the emir decided there and then never to marry, for he liked his peace and quiet. For many years he remained single, until one day he could stand it no longer. Summoning his chief servant, the emir asked him to go to the slave market and choose him the most beautiful slave girl he could find there. For the first few days, the emir was happy with his new companion, but after a week or two, she changed totally. From being modest, patient, and kind, she became rude, impatient, greedy. She would start ordering the servants around, demanding expensive clothes and more jewels. She became lazy and grouchy. So the emir sent her back to the slave merchant, asking for a new girl to be sent. One after another, slave girls came and went. Month after month, the emir looked in vain for that rare pearl, a woman who would be loving, patient and kind, not only to him, but to everyone she met. A woman who would not argue, shout and order everyone around, demanding jewelry, gowns, and even whole towns to be given to her. What was the reason for all this bad luck, you might ask? Why was the emir lonely and never satisfied? The reason is not too difficult to find. Hidden in the remotest room of the castle was an old servant woman, toothless and ugly, with a hunched back and a nasty heart. She disliked the emir and tried to harm him at every opportunity. Every morning, while the emir was busy with his viziers, she went secretly to his favorite slave girl and started putting ideas into her head. "You should be treated like a queen, not a slave," she would whisper under her bad breath. "You should ask for a new dress today," she would say, hissing through her toothless gums. "You should demand diamonds and rubies and pearl necklaces." No wonder the slave girls became greedy. No wonder nothing would please them. And no wonder the emir got rid of them all. At last the emir grew weary. He retired to his river palace and told his chief servant, "Do not bring me any more slave girls." By the way, slave girls in those days, we're talking about 13th century, were a common commodity. Just like the USA, much later, slaves were just a commodity. People bought them, alas and unfortunately. That's why they seep into a lot of the stories we will be listening to. So, for a while, the emir was alone again. He would spend his days wandering by the riverside, dreaming of a loving and patient wife. One morning, the chief servant came running to the breakfast room, shouting, I found her, sire." "Whom have you found?" asked the emir, munching on his date cake. "The perfect girl, your majesty," answered the chief servant with a bow. "Who is she?" asked the emir, taking a sip of his chamomile tea. "She has come with a slave caravan all the way from China," said the chief servant excitedly. "Her hair is as black as the night, and her face as pale as the moon. She can sing, dance, recite poetry, and play the harp, and she has the sweetest of tempers," he added quickly. "I do not want anyone," said the emir, rinsing his hands with rose water. "I doubt that she will be any different from the rest." "Oh, Majesty, please consider her just this last time," begged the chief servant. All right, mumbled the emir, drying his hands with a silk cloth. "Bring her to me, but this is the last time I give in to your advice." The slave merchant was summoned at once to the palace with the girl, and when the emir saw her, he fell instantly in love with her. "I will take her," he said to the slave merchant. "I am sorry, sire, but I cannot give her away," the merchant answered. "Why not?" asked the emir. "This Chinese beauty, for whom your heart beats, has been bought by all the kings of the Orient. Each time I sold her, she was returned to me the very next day," the merchant explained. "No one would say why." "I will take her anyway," the emir declared. "I welcome challenges," he added, throwing a purse full of gold at the bewildered merchant. The next morning, the merchant waited for the emir to send the slave girl back, but he did not. The following morning, the merchant waited again and again, the morning after too. Finally, tired of waiting, the merchant took his leave, hoping the slave girl had passed the test. She had indeed charmed his majesty in every way. Whatever she did, dance, sing, or play the harp, or recite poetry, she did perfectly. She worked like a slave, but behaved like a queen, patient, loving, and kind. The sly words of the evil old servant woman had absolutely no effect on her. She never asked the emir for money, never asked for jewels or clothing, but followed him like his shadow, always faithful and quiet. The emir was conquered by her and proposed marriage. The court could not believe it. Then, to everyone's surprise, she politely refused. The court was stunned. "How dare they say "How dare she say no to our emir," they whispered. "Who does she think she is?" The emir surprised them even more by not getting angry at all. Instead, he invited the lovely slave to a candlelit dinner by the riverside. After eating an exquisite meal and listening to the enchanting music and wonderful songs, the emir said, "Tell me, beautiful one, why you refuse to marry me?" Blushing under her veil, the slave girl answered, "My lord, you are my emir and master, but I am unable to tell you the truth."
"The truth must never be hidden," argued the emir. "Let me tell you the story. King Solomon had a beautiful wife called Bilqis, whom he loved and respected. In addition, he had everything a king could ask for: fame, wisdom, and riches. But alas, his only son was born crippled in hand and foot, unable to lift a piece of bread to his mouth or walk a single step without help.
"O king," said Bilqis, "both of us have perfectly formed hands and feet. Why is our son so crippled? Something has to be done. I beg you, dear husband, to pray to God for guidance." King Solomon prayed with all his heart, asking God for an answer to his problem. That night, the angel Gabriel appeared to him in a dream and said, "If you and Bilqis were to speak the truth to each other, your child would be cured." In the morning, King Solomon hurried to his wife and told her,
"My dear, all is clear. The cure will happen when we speak the truth to each other."
"The truth? What truth?" asked Bilqis in surprise.
"The truth we have been hiding from each other all these years," King Solomon answered.
Queen Bilqis took a deep breath. She summoned her courage and said, "The truth, my lord, is that you are a wonderful king and husband, loved and respected by all. But I, your queen, have to confess that whenever I see a handsome man, my heart beats faster and I start wishing he were my husband instead." The moment Queen Bilqis spoke the truth, the little prince stretched his arms and said, "Look, mother, I can hold your hand now." So overjoyed was he by the miracle that King Solomon could not be angry with Bilqis. Instead, summoning his courage in turn, he bowed his head and told her,
"When people come to me seeking words of wisdom, the first thing I do is look at the gift they are carrying in their hands. I feel ashamed of my greed, for God has blessed me beyond belief, but I cannot help it."
The moment King Solomon spoke the truth, the little prince stretched his legs, stood on his feet, and said, "See, father, I can walk. I don't need crutches anymore." Solomon and Bilqis embraced their son with tears in their eyes and promised from then on always to tell the truth, however painful it might seem at first. had finished his story, he looked into the slave girl's eyes and said,
"If Solomon and Bilqis could tell each other the truth, my love, maybe you can too."
The slave girl looked at him through her veil and saw only gentleness and concern. She decided to trust him, for a secret shared is lighter to bear. "If I tell you my secret, Your Majesty, will you tell me yours? Will you tell me why hundreds of slave girls have come and gone, and yet you have given your heart to none of them?"
"Tell me yours first, my dear, then I shall tell you mine,"
the emir promised. "My secret, my lord, is a sad one to share. All the women in my family die at childbirth. That is why I made a vow never to marry, for I prefer to live single and have no worry."
"Your secret is sad indeed," replied the emir, "but it sleeps safely in my heart."
"Now that I have revealed my secret," said the slave girl, "it is your turn, Majesty, to unveil the mystery of the 100 slave girls who came and went through these palace gates."
"Some years ago, those who study the planets and the stars and draw the maps of people's hearts and fates told me that if I ever married, I would spend my life fighting with my wife. Many a woman I had brought to me wishing to make her my queen. But the moment she set her eyes on splendor and wealth, she became greedy, impatient, and unkind. You alone, my love, have remained pure of heart, loving, patient, gentle. You alone shall be my queen," declared the emir, kissing the slave girl's hands. "Your Majesty, your words are music to my soul," replied the girl. "Let us promise each other, with the rising sun as our witness, that the truth shall be our fortress, so that we most fear may never come to pass." "Come here, my chosen one. Take off your silken veils so that I can admire your beauty, for no emir before me has been blessed with a companion as precious as you."
The sun showered its golden rays on the emir and his bride, who embraced and kissed and promised always to keep the truth in their marriage as their guide. "Yellow makes people happy," said Princess Humay, who was telling the story to King Bahram. "It is the color of saffron. It's the color of gold and good advice, and it is the color of truth. The sun is like a golden ball, and the wheat in summer is yellow. Lemons, pears, and apples are yellow, and so is white wine in a golden cup."
"Thank you for such a fascinating story," said Shah Bahram to Princess Humay. "This day that I have spent in the yellow pavilion of the sun will remain as precious to me as gold."
That was a story from the 7 Wise Princesses, which I wrote a number of years ago, which is about King Bahram finding wisdom through visiting the 7 pavilions where 7 princesses reside. And each pavilion is represented by a color. Bahram moves on a symbolic path from black, which was last week's story, representing the hidden majesty of the divine, to white, which will be our last story, which represents purity and unity. The remaining colors, such as yellow, which we read this week, represent the active qualities of nature. So yellow represents dryness. Next week, we will be reading the story of the green princess in the green pavilion, and green represents wetness, red represents heat, and blue represents cold. Now there is one color which also represents the earth and the goodness that arises from it, and it's the color of sandalwood, which is light brown. It is now time to join Rumi's Daughter by Muriel Mofroi and see what happens to Kara when she hears her first ever music concert, which was organized by Rumi, her adoptive father, and Shams of Tabriz, against everybody else in town who thought that music would sway people away from God. But Kara, when she heard the music and the song for the first time in her life, had a mystical experience. She felt she was in a current of pure water and everything disappeared. And then, suddenly, the cold on her forehead brought her back. Somewhere above her was Kara's voice sounding worried. "Kimia, are you all right?" She opened her eyes. The night had lost its shine, and Kara was pressing a wet cloth on her brow. Her eyes were saying, I know, sometimes it's too much to bear." Kimia remembered the day when she had cried in the hollow of a tree, unable to explain what it was she had experienced. This time there was no need to explain. Kara knew. She heard someone nearby murmuring, "That was Taus. No one else can sing like that." Maulana Jalaluddin Rumi was now standing up. "Glory be to God," he said. "The love of God has many voices. Tonight we have had the privilege to hear one of his voices." Next to him, Shams of Tabriz, an impregnable mountain of silence, was still sitting, head bent down over his knees. People were looking at each other, uneasy, but their faces had softened, washed by the music, Kimia thought. "Women? Music? Maulana has lost his senses." The man was indignant, and all this because of that beggar from Tabriz. Kimia was standing in front of a fruit stall at the edge of the market. It was early, and there were still few people around. She turned her head and saw two men sitting on a cart a few steps behind her, engaged in conversation. "You may be right after all," one of the men answered, the tone of his voice somewhat more restrained. "Until now, I trusted that Maulana Jalaluddin Rumi would come back to himself, but he seems to stray further and further away from God." The man was shaking his head with disapproval. "That beggar has too much power over our master," they said. Unaware of Kimia's presence, the two men continued. "Do you know what Maulana said last night at that concert? He said that women's voices were the voices of God. What kind of nonsense is that?"
"Is that what he said?" The other man sounded shocked. "But that is blasphemy."
Kimia turned away. She felt sad. It was always the same. People talked and passed judgment about things they knew nothing about. For neither of these men had, of course, been at the concert. She was lost in her thoughts when she saw Khadija's mother coming towards her. Khadija's mother was a small and sturdy woman with dark, warm eyes, always quick to give her opinion, solicited or not. "How are you feeling today, young lady?" she asked. "You know, you fainted last night." There was a hint of suspicion or of slight outrage in her voice. "Are you taking care of yourself?" Kimia couldn't help laughing. "Of course I'm taking care of myself," she said. "I think I was a little too hot last night, that's all." Khadija's mother stared at her, weighing Kimia's answer. She was not convinced. "You're soon to be a woman," she went on. "Your body is growing and changing. You need to eat and sleep." With her hands on her hips, she looked like an ancient goddess, both menacing and protective. "You know, Kimia, I've been thinking recently, God is much simpler than men are making him. All he wants is for us to live our life without hurting each other, and that is all." Her eyes were bright with unshaken certainty. Not knowing what to say, Kimia nodded in what she hoped looked like agreement. "I must go on," she said. I haven't started my shopping yet." Of course, Khadija's mother approved, but she couldn't help giving a last piece of her mind. "Music is very well," she said, "but life goes on, and we women have to look after our men, holy or not." There was an air of provocation in her eyes, and Kimia wondered, what did she mean? Was she hinting that, like so many others, she too had reservations as to Shams's reputation and his alleged holiness? Kimia walked away, worried and feeling powerless. She went from stall to stall, buying here a bag of peaches and there some leeks and squashes. But her heart was heavy with apprehension, and attending to her shopping was an effort. Clouds were collecting above Maulana and Shams, and every day those clouds were becoming darker. How would this end? If you want to know the rest of the story, you need to be tuned in to next week's episode of Muriel Mofroua's Rumi's Daughter. We are approaching the end of our program, which was dedicated to flowers, and I would like to leave you, my dear listeners, with a few amazing pearls from Rumi. For instance, he tells us, "Raise your words, not your voice. It is rain that grows flowers, not thunder." And also he says, "How should spring bring forth a garden on hard stone?" Become earth means stop being hard. Let's open our heart to become earth instead of hard stone, because we may grow flowers of many colors, for you have been heartbreaking rock. Once, for the sake of experiment, be earth. Rumi is advising us this week to soften our heart and open it like a rose so we can grow, to be like earth and be like a rose. He also tells us to wander in the field of flowers, pull the thorns from your heart. Not sit with sadness, my friends. When you enter a garden, do you look at thorns or do you look at flowers? And he advises us to spend time with roses and jasmines. I hope you enjoyed this edition of Sufi Voices on flowers. It's been a wonderful opportunity for me to be in touch with you. Please join me in the chat and tell me what you liked, what you didn't like. If there's anything you'd like more of, I'd love to hear your opinion. It's been a great privilege and a great pleasure to be with you this week on this wonderful, wonderful week of spring in May. I wish you ma'as-salama, namaste, peace be with you, and until we meet, a wonderful week ahead. I'm Wafa, and you tuned in to Oneness Talk Radio. One world, one voice. Expand your vision.